It's great to be here talking about gamification in the city. As you just said, it's the potential of spaces and the potential of putting play into them. Just really quickly, hi, I'm Will. I'm creative director and head of innovation at Qd Creative. Qd Creative are a creative technology company that create digital experiences which for a large part are AR, VR, and MR, although not exclusively. We use technology and we try to find interesting solutions. Now that leads us to work across a bunch of sectors. So we work in education, in medtech, in entertainment, in storytelling. So you can see up on screen a couple of projects that we've worked on. Cognovi and Cognuro, a multi-user education platform that lets people see AR content globally in real time. A piece for Wallace and Gromit that I'll talk about more later. A piece with Dr. Seuss called Dr. Seuss Abc, which was the first exploration of Dr. Seuss's characters into AR, bringing books to life. A piece for Assassins Creed and Hampshire Cultural Trust, which I'll be talking about later, and a VR piece enabling you to step back into history. We're proud to work with a number of people, including Dr. Seuss, Osmo, Aardman, UK government, Ubisoft, a number of others. All of that is just to say that we're able to work with people who are looking to find interesting solutions. This has led us to a number of awards, such as it is, most importantly, the Qld XR Festival last year, Best AR App and Best in World. Definitely the high point of the year. I'm going to be sharing through a couple of city experience examples today to reinforce what we're talking about. The first is Wallace and Gromit's Big Fix Up and Fix Up the City. The second is the new Assassins Creed Valhala experience. This is an upcoming project that we're working on with Hampshire Cultural Trust and Ubisoft. There's a limit to what I can say here because it's not fully public domain as yet, but it will take you into some of the high level on the first time that Assassin's Creed assets have ever been used to create an immersive experience and how they're embedded in the world around us. So to the core of this, play in the city. It's what is it? Why am I even talking about it? Well, the ability to play in the city takes the act of play and gives it both framing and juxtaposition, which is a slightly highfalutin way of saying that there is context and a type of engagement that you wouldn't be able to achieve without that spreading of play into space. So why is it interesting? Well, you and others are able to enjoy the space, a space in which people become compatriots in a shared experience. As you are moving through the space, so are others. Now, you can see on the right an incredible moment from the early days of Pokemon Go in which the word of the Snorlax has spread and you see a literal stampede of people through a city bringing the traffic to a stop. It's a moment of kind of absurdity, almost zombie-like horror, but it's also an incredible thing whereby you see people coming together and sharing a space and having a context within that space that you weren't expecting. Now, the fact that they are in a space that they know taps into a cultural aspect. It takes a place that's known and looks at where you are within it, but it also enables you to tap into the nature of that environment in terms of the hidden layers that are contained within it. Every street has an incredible array of history, not just at a factual level, but at a personal level. This provides content that's there and can be revealed, but also a personal investment in play. So on the right-hand side here, I've got a little snap of Camden Lock Market. Now, Camden Lock Market, very famous place in the UK, incredible history, been there for almost 2,000 years. For me, it's also the place where I got my first tattoo. So any play that takes place in that space has all of that history that you tap into, all of those times that you've wandered down it half cut, but also those personal moments that are going to be different for everybody. The further layer of this is the thing that we all do, the thing that we've been doing since we were in a playground. We walk down a street, we walk down a playground. We imagine things that are not there. we're able to take our imagination and make it real. We're able to manifest and imagine things that are beyond the normal. And doing this in a public space that you're already familiar with has the potential for something magical. It's going to show my age rather, but for me, this actually genuinely stems back to the first time watching Ghostbusters. That moment of going, oh crumbs, I imagined a thing. I couldn't imagine anything nicer, sweeter. It's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Bringing him to life, seeing him move through a city, that moment of absurdist horror, that really stuck with me. And that's still my goal, to make those things real and to have those truly magical moments that come with it. So that's some kind of high angle stuff on why storytelling and play and spaces can be really, really interesting. But what about the elements of the city scale experiences? What can we actually harness? What can we do? What have we done? Well, you got to look at position and location for a start. Do you know where the user is in a real world? Do you know where you are? And how does any system know where you are? This is fundamentally positional awareness. You got GPS coordinates, this place is you, and this place is the content. But beyond that, not all location is fixed, as much as that sounds strange. You have buildings, you have real world objects that can, in theory, move and shift. So you have a locational awareness where you are in the real world based upon known real world objects. And lastly, you have a subjective awareness. Do you know where the user is relative only to themselves? What does that let you do? If you say not just I am here in space, but I'm just here. So what can happen to me individually? Those three elements then let us build the elements of a play-based city around us. The first way in which you can do this is you can just add to the world. So you can see on the right-hand side a moment from the Wallace and Gromit Big Fix-Up that we made in combination with Potato and TRG, that in which you have robot pigeons that have invaded a local park and a need to go and capture them inside a automatic cage that's been made by Wallace. These are just added to the world around you. These are the most classic, obvious AR imagination coming to life. You're gathering, you're throwing, you're interacting, but fundamentally, they're just in the world around you. Going further than this, we can start to overlay things into our world. We can place the content into the world as if it's there. A crucial element to this is that we harness what I'm sure you all know, occlusion. The ability for digital objects to disappear behind real world buildings so that it feels real. Now, you can see on the right a couple of stills from an experience we made with a giant robot appearing over the top of building in Bristol. It becomes part of the world in the way in which simply adding does not, because it has a basic awareness of the content around it. This can start to make stuff feel as if it's really there. Of note here, we should just quickly look at scale. Now, scale is not just the area that you can set a thing in, but the physical size of the content. So you can see on the right, a building called the Nunneminster from Winchester. Now, this features heavily in Assassins Creed Valhalla. It also is going to be part of the Assassins Creed Valhalla experience we're making. It's huge, like properly big. It is 4 or 5 stories, and it's no longer there. But within the experience, it will come back to life at the full size that it was, big enough to be able to walk into. The flip side of this is another beautiful Ubisoft example, that when you consider scale, expectations of scale don't always match the actual scale of a thing. So Ubisoft's pyramids in Assassin's Creed are about 30% bigger than they actually would have been, because when people were playing it, they went, these are a bit small. And so they had to scale them up. So you have some fun things with scale, not just expected scale, but real world scale as well. Another way in which you can handle space, because you know that people are stepping into it, is to actually physically transport them to a different entire world that is based upon the space that is there now. So you can immerse them into a false space. Knowing that real world lets you completely transport them whilst allowing free movement. So because you can create something that maps to the real world, once they're in, they can walk completely normally, but they can still have another world in which they're walking around. So on the right here, you can see some elements of a Jack the Ripper history learning experience that we created that lets you step back into Victorian England. Now, this takes place on the site of where one of the bodies was found, and lets you move through the same streets, but in a different time period. So that was some of the ways in which a city can become a playable space. But how does that work? How can we even build something like that? Now, some of you will already be familiar with it, but some of you less so. So when we were talking about positional components of how you know a user is in a space, you've got GPS. Now, this lets us grab positional data from the user. It's a very blunt tool. It says, does my phone know where I am? Or does any other system that I've got on me, any wearable, know where I am based upon global positioning? And then lets you go, okay, well, what else can I trigger? Can I say that some content lives only at one place in the world or a certain number of places? Now, it is a little inaccurate, predominantly because governments don't fancy giving tech companies the ability to make high detailed homing weapons that can drop bombs on specific street corners. But it's enough that we can get, with a little bit of finesse, some accuracy. Now, on the right-hand side, you can actually see how Google have used this to just simply enrich navigation. Where am I going? Where am I? And from that, just follow a creature to be able to navigate for you. That same base data can be enriched with environment data that's pre-existing. So you have your GPS coordinates. How does it combine with something like Google Maps height data, systems like Mapbox? Well, it combines your positional data with a known mapping system. That lets you build an environment around you. So you can see with Pokemon Go, they took a very simple version of this and said, okay, that's going to bring in a map showing where I am, showing where Pokestops are. Nowadays, the data that you can draw on is significantly richer, all the height data, but also all the meta layer data. This lets you say, I am near coffee shops. I'm currently stood in a park. This in turn lets you build maps that aren't just navigational, but become elements of play. Do you want things to only happen to you when you're in a graveyard or next to a coffee shop? So a really lovely example of a small demo that was made a while back in which you were hunting ghosts. Now, the nature of these ghosts was variable based upon where you are. If you were in a graveyard, obviously there'd be ghosts and they'd be big and scary. But out on the street, if you were next to a coffee shop, the ghosts would become very, very quick because they're all caffeinated. That sort of ability to adjust to your environment means that you're creating meta data, meta experiences within the city that you're creating the play in. I'm very specifically not going to talk about the metaverse here because it's kind of already what we're all doing and is a bit dull. But it shows that that meta layering is at the heart of what you can do when you're talking about your city. This environment mapping data is one of the things that we're going to be harnessing for the Assassins Creed Valhalla immersive city experience, because it lets us show what is, but also then layering what was. Going into more fidelity, going into more practical and technical detail about what you can do with a city. Well, to be more accurate, you need richer data. So systems like Phantasmo that enable you to scan an environment in really, really high detail let you have a lot of a lot of fun with it because you can create entire virtual recreations of a city, but crucially, let you compare what a camera is seeing against a digital known truth, and then overlay items within that space incredibly accurately. So where we've talked about maps and GPS data, they have a kind of inaccuracy to them. Now, if you scan an environment and compare that environment to what the phone is seeing, you can place content into that with less than a meter of accuracy. So this was one of the key systems that we harnessed with Wallace Gromit's Fix Up the City. So you can see on the right-hand side that the player has looked at a building. Now they could look at this from anywhere in about a kind of 2-block radius, and it would interpret what they are seeing against a known truth. And from that, reverse engineer where they're stood. This then lets all of the content that play in that city appear around them.
So
that's big scale.
Sorry to interrupt. So so with what you showed us just before, you would take the data, like is it the LiDAR data from that, and then combine it with what you see in Google or something along those lines, or is it everything from that LiDAR device?
You can do both. You can combine it with data from Google, but you don't need to, because what this enables you to do is query an API. So you can go, okay, what is my camera seeing? What do we think we're seeing? Now, eventually Google will have a full scan of every city in the world and we'll be able to use their data. But at the moment, it's not rich enough to provide what you need to say, I am exactly here. The upshot of that is knowing exactly where you are and what buildings are around you.
Fantastic. That's incredible. So when you did this particular project, how long, or I guess, do you know the square meterage or footage, or I'm not sure the correct term I'm using here. Would you cover like 10 kilometers square or something along those lines? I imagine it'd be quite difficult to do 100 kilometers or 1,000 kilometers doing this, because he's obviously...
Fascinatingly, it doesn't matter how much, because you're only ever comparing what you're seeing on a camera to some data that's held. So the more that has been scanned, the more that you can compare against, because you are only interpreting your position.
Right, gotcha. Yeah.
We've been in talks recently about how you could do entire cities, but for that you're limited by the scanning data that's available.
Yeah,
and it's where companies like Phantasmo, who are professional scanners, they are generating the data for us to use and generating the ability to have that system. In Fix Up the City, we actually did 3 different cities. So we did Bristol, we did Cardiff, and we did San Francisco, with areas that varied in each, and also areas around the city. So it's not a single area. So super, super flexible. Key is that you are scanning an environment and then comparing known vision to personal vision. It's, as you just said, it's based on LiDAR tech. So it's based upon what depth is. You don't have to use pre-scanned data for LiDAR to be really efficient in bringing spaces and cities to life. So because you can scan depth in real time, this gives you a map of an area that can be utilized and combined with an intelligence of items that are placed within it. So on the right, you can see some sections of a demo product that we made with Apple. Now, in it, you have the mission to help Gromit get rid of some invading robot pigeons. These pigeons emerge into any room from a wall. Now, it does this because the LiDAR detection knows what a vertical surface is, and it knows if a vertical surface is sufficiently big. So because you have that depth, it emerges from the wall, and then the characters within it move around the space. At that point, you've just got simple game logic, simple game AI. What makes it really magical is the fact that because it has an ever-evolving understanding of that depth, these bits of content can land in your room. So the pigeons on the right are actually landing on a table. They're able to know the space that you have placed them into. And this is crucial because when you're talking about play inside a city, inside any space, it's not enough that you are there. It has to feel like the content is there too. Niantic's Lightship promises to do a lot of this. At the moment, it's focused on how we can be aware of that environment, so how it can section stuff up. But they are going to be releasing Object Permanence. Now, Object Permanence is a game changer for this because you can set content into our world and have it stay there, have it live. Google Cloud Anchors, which again is set to be updated with Object Permanence soon, lets you do a very similar thing. Lets you compare what you have to a known environment, but crucially lets you compare it to each other. Now, this lets you have multiple people seeing the same thing. You can now start to see that with environmental awareness, comparison to other people, comparison to a known thing, and then soon Object Permanence, as experienced architects, will be able to put things into our world, have them stay there, have them live there, have them explore, separate to us. It's every schoolboy's bedroom dream of like, oh, I really wish I was in the World of Warcraft. I really wish I could go. Because you are able to then say these characters live inside our world. They're just a hidden layer that you can then step into. Separate from all of that conceptual overlaying, when building into a city, we can harness the fact that the city's physical. We're able to use object recognition. Now, object recognition has been around in a number of different ways through machine learning for a number of years. What's really cool now is just how accessible this is. Toolkits made by Google, made by Apple, made by Vuforia. They let us pre-generate content, pre-generate scans of the real world, and then say, okay, when you see this, add this piece of information to it. Now you can see here an early demo we've got because the main project that we're going to be doing with this can't be shared yet, unfortunately. But you can see how a tiny statue can be seen and understood and content added to it.
That's actually a step ahead where it used to be at. It would just detect the single sort of frontal view. The way that you're twisting that object is amazing.
It sticks and it lives with it. So as much as we're twisting the object, that was slightly lazy of us. It's what we should be actually be doing in this demo is moving around it because it becomes tethered to its physical form. So machine learning algorithms are going, okay, what am I seeing? And then layering the data on top of it in the physical space.
That's fantastic.
So you can move around it completely fluidly.
Yeah, this is what we dreamed of 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Oh God,
yeah. AR first came
AR
out.
object detection. It's like, oh yeah, I just want to stick this to this. Oh, you're gonna have to wait. How long are you gonna have to wait? A while.
A long time. Yeah.
But it's here, and the systems are really flexible and really available. The potential of this is obviously ginormous, and it goes to that cultural meta understanding of physical place. So every single, I don't know what it's like where you are, Matt, but UK is full of statues of old white guys.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. They came from UK and obviously
we did a thing.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it anymore.
Sorry.
But those statues have a history. Those places have a history, and they have content and different understandings that you can layer into them. So it becomes part of a public consciousness. Instead of it being abstracted, it then becomes rooted again in the real and starts a discussion, shares stories. Now, it's one of the things that we're doing with National Museum Wales to look at decolonializing their collection, to go every object, in the first case, one object, but eventually every object in the museum will carry stories and interpretations that aren't just a single line. So what does it mean to different people from different places in different cultures at different times? And how do we attune ourselves to see different elements of this? Now, you mentioned early days AR there, Matt. Image recognition has been around a long time. It was some of the earliest form of AR. But when you're talking about a city, that simple AR comes into its own because you have images that live inside the real world, that are integrated into that space, that aren't, here's a car that I can make something appear off the card. Yeah, that's so what. But as soon as you have graffiti covering the side of an entire building, you then get the ability for that to come to life. It's all about giving that space a further dimension. Now, you can also see how that doesn't have to be fixed to a space. That can be fixed to a person. So tattoos that come to life that move around your city become a further layer of interactivity. We're still looking for a good opportunity to make giant space invaders. We've been itching to do this since we first looked at image recognition and went, hold on a minute, we're not thinking big enough. I want an entire side of a building that I'm defending from giant old school space invaders that are coming down. Because it's that, it goes back to that thing that we imagine. We imagine what it would look like if something comes over the top of a hill, and you can start to do this. And image recognition is a very, very simple way of handling that. I touched earlier on what it means to have a space that one can have intelligent content in. It's really, really, really important that not only are you adding stuff to that space, but that those things are combined with the knowledge of the space so they can interact with it. So on the right here, you can see some moments from Dr. Seuss's ABC AR. Now, I've stuck to experiences that we've created just so that I can talk with a little bit more authority about them. But there are a number out there, and you can, this was done 2.5, 3 years ago. So this was the first product to market that used Unity's Mars engine. But there are a number now that go, okay, what is my world around me? How does space interact with the characters, and how does this enable them to do stuff? So on the left-hand side, you have the fact that some clouds have rained paint into your room, and then the Ichabods are running around, leaving their footprints, moving around, creating this mess, but also enabling you to create finger painting patterns through your world. In the middle, you've got the culmination of characters in the real world playing hide and seek. Now, I am slightly ashamed to admit how many hours I have spent on this game that we made playing hide and seek with characters. You're able to ask a character to play with you. He will then run off in your real space, moving between tables and furniture whilst you close your eyes, hide behind furniture, hide behind other characters inside the space, and wait for you to come and find him. It doesn't get old. There is something insanely magical about that. On the right-hand side, you've got a simple version of this, which is just playing fetch. You can throw things into the world. They'll bounce off tables, they'll bounce off floors. Now, we've seen this a couple of times. It's getting more and more popular, but I don't think that popularity should mitigate the potential of using this in spaces to create play. Now, this is the simplest example, but as soon as you're getting, I can shoot this thing irrespective of scale, and it can crash land around me. It's one of the flagship components of Niantic's Lightship SDK. It's what we're going to see an awful lot of going forward. But the other thing here is that we're talking about characters. We don't need to be talking about characters. We can also be talking about the content of that space to have an intelligence. Now, that can mean that vines can grow. So say one of my favorite books, and indeed film adaptations of the last few years, is Annihilation. That vision of a creeping environment that distorts the world around it. What about plants that come into our world, into our city and grow, showing what climate change would look like, showing what an altered reality is? It also means that we can start to set rules of how we want different environments to appear. So do we want grass to go on the floor and not the table? Do we want trees to grow on tables and not walls? This is all an intelligence that we're able to have because of the space being understood. I mentioned here that was underpinned by Unity Mars, and I'm going to very quickly give a nod to it because it is a phenomenally powerful program if used right. It's got conditional logic. It sits inside the Unity engine, but it lets items be placed on surfaces by type, by alignment, by frequency, by proximity. One of the things that we had to do was place a fireplace into a room. Now you go, okay, that's nice and simple. Well, it has to sit adjoining a floor on a wall with enough space around it. And that has to be able to shift no matter what space you're in. So that applies whatever scale you're doing. So if you're at a city scale, I need to be able to put new doors, but only onto the front of buildings and only where they join the ground. We also harnessed this with Wallace and Gromit, and we created a Wallace-ified space around you. So the famous items from Wallace's house were then superimposed on your house, but only in an environment where it was suitable. So you would get shoes on the floor, toolboxes on the table, pictures on the walls.
So if I tried to force my shoes on top of the table, would it let me away?
Would not let you.
Wow. Oh, wow. Well, that's clever.
Because the system that we're talking about here is saying, how do we know what a table is, and how do we know that a table differs from a floor? Well, we know that it's a flat surface that tends to be smaller and tends to be a certain distance above the big flat surface.
Right. So like a meter.
Whenever it's seeing those surfaces, it's going, what does it think it is?
Wow, that's clever. That's really clever, actually.
It also, and again, it does the same thing with flat surfaces as different from walls. So what alignment is it in? And then you can also say, okay, we want to define shelves. Now, this is where you can start putting your own logic in and go, is it a flat surface? Is it above the floor? But is it also above a table? Because you will never have a shelf that is below a table height. So you can then say, okay, things which are elevated behave differently. All of this goes to unique spaces. Now, this lingers on interior spaces in cities, which I don't think should be ignored, but it can be applied to anything. Now, why would we care? Well, spaces are variable. My bedroom is not the same as your bedroom, Matt. It's going to have different shapes. It's going to have different surfaces available. And any experience that is created, any story that's told, needs to either be rooted in a very specific place or have a flexibility so that it can be, so the key elements of it can be placed around you based upon a certain logic. It's why we've started to move to talk about authoring rather than designing, because you are setting parameters for how things will play out, how an imagined world takes place around you. That flexibility is then key to doing whatever is needed, wherever it is needed. The stuff that I've just talked about there is quite a fixed understanding of physical objects inside the space. It doesn't have to be. We can now harness wider understanding of the environment. So you can see on the right here how Google's Scaredy Lion is reacting to the environment or environment light sources. So how dark is it? We all know that our phones are not just listening to us, but also watching us and taking in environmental data. That includes light. We created a Halloween experience for a client in which the ghost of your dear departed dog, Bido, came out only at night. During the day, he resided in his Bonio biscuit tin, which when the lights went off, he emerged from and you were able to then play with. Now, that defies what you expect to see, because you don't expect characters to have an awareness of the real world around you. It doesn't just have to be things that your phone can directly interpret. There is an almost limitless amount of API available data. So you want to do weather, you want your characters to open umbrellas when the city has got rain on it. Why wouldn't you? Because we can easily check the weather on our phone, well, so can our characters. They're going to know what you can do. It also means that you can start to change the shadows. So not just light volume, but light direction combined with known sun positions. Whatever you're putting into your world fits better than it ever could before.
That's incredible. That's really cool.
It starts to make it so that it's not just stuck and drawn on. It starts to make it so it's got that real kind of quality of being there with you.
I remember when you were showing me the stuff from about 2 or 3 years ago, and I saw all the drop shadows. I remember when drop shadows were a thing. Well, they've always been a thing, but when it was first introduced in AR, and people were like, wow, there's no drop shadows. This doesn't integrate with the environment. And then when the drop shadows first started appearing, well, people recognized that, oh, okay, it's more like, the virtual and the real world are merging together. Now you're doing stuff like the weather and everything else. Anything that has an API, I guess you could use as a variable to influence your characters.
Yeah.
It's obvious, but you never actually think of it. Yeah. Yeah, it's like weather, of course. But yeah, no one ever.
Of course weather would be a thing. Of course, anything that we react to, we measure. We are a species of measurers.
Absolutely.
So all those anoraks out there who are desperate to measure the wind speed and wind direction on any given day in every location. It's like, great, now I can actually use this to, we're prototyping at the moment a kite,
right,
which you can fly that will follow the weather patterns. So how fast and the direction that it tends to move in.
No way.
And it's complicated, but it starts to go, okay, where can we break down the boundaries?
That is quite cool. That's clever. Yeah.
It takes us into the fact that we're operating in a physical space. Now, when a location becomes a space, so not just I am here, but what does it mean to be here? That has a three-dimensional form. That almost becomes theatrical. So as soon as you start to say, my city is a place that I'm playing in, and as soon as you start designing for people to play inside that space, if you want to have any control over it, they become a theatrical audience, and an audience which is able to move and is able to look in any direction. Now that is an absolute nightmare of a structural challenge. How do you understand where they're looking, when they're looking, why they're looking in a certain direction? How do you enable stories, experiences, the thing that you want to tell inside the space to flex? Now, the answer to some of this is go and find yourself a theatrical director and work with them, because they've been dealing with this for years and have some really, really clever ways to handle it. It also means that you need to have some new considerations, certainly considerations that we hadn't had before. On the right-hand side, my rather crummy diagram is an image of the bay in Cardiff. Now, this is one of the locations for big fix-up, for Fix Up the City's experience. It features giant robots and multitude of contraptions interacting with the space, interacting with you. But the key part is that it's in this space. And this space looks quite obvious. On the left-hand side, there's a giant Ferris wheel. A giant Ferris wheel that wasn't there when we designed and scanned the experience. Your space changes. You have to plan for that. Otherwise, you're suddenly being confronted with stuff that isn't there. It's got some water in it. First time we developed an AR city experience, we completely forgot that people would look at their phones, and we had test people walking into roads, about to walk into the water, because they just forgot their environment. I used to think that Pokemon Go's be careful of your surroundings was just a moment of kind of like overcautiousness. And then you see people doing it, you go, no, it really isn't, because if you're any good at what you do, you're immersing them, and then they forget where they're going.
Have you got any data from people actually ending in the lake or the river? I can imagine.
Fortunately not. It's definitely going to happen. For our testing, we always have handlers, but it's surprising how much people forget to do the thing that they would normally do of look.
Oh, absolutely. In Australia, at least, we have the people who will look at their phone as they're crossing the road, and I'm sure you have it in the UK as well. And it's like, would the big fix-up detect a collision with the water person? Or whatever.
Just have your phone do environmental water detection.
Yes,
Spring up a whoop.
Actually, my Samsung detects water, so it probably could. It could, absolutely.
We try and avoid having that situation in the first place.
True. Yeah. You're more thorough.
One of the other things that we struggled to and worked really hard to avoid is people getting shot. So on the right hand side, that lovely little building with the small domes on top. That's a government building. Turns out government buildings get really, really jumpy when you start to have lots of people pointing phones at them. So our early playtesters had guys with guns coming out, having them put in their faces going, "Hi, what are you here for? Can you please explain yourself?" Which again, unexpected. You're in a physical space with the rules of that physical space, and you've got to be super aware of that. It's a new consideration you have to prepare for. Also things like, are there new bits of content? Where is it variable? And trees, God, how I hate trees. We talk about the variability of structures being erected. Every single tree changes shape every single day. The need to adjust and adapt for shifting environment becomes almost impossible with trees, but you know it, therefore you can plan for it. With these new spaces, you've also got new audiences. The background of this image is one that I always love. It's from a game in which Mario is in a different world space, and you're able to, I'm pretty sure it's the first time you ever saw him next to a real proportioned human. So you have this kind of absurd moment of what you think a thing should look like and your expectation of it when confronted with the real world. Now, I've got some stuff that I want to mention about onboarding, but before we do, there's a conceptual element to new audiences' expectations, which was made really apparent to us when we first made Wallace and made him look, we spent ages making him look exactly like he'd been made of clay, tiny thumbprints. And then we scaled him up to be 6 foot tall. And then we placed him into the world. And dear God, what a monstrosity that becomes when you have a clay man covered in thumbprints walking towards you. It is a horrific visage, because a thing that works in one context no longer works in another. So you then have to adjust and adapt. So the audience's expectations whilst being in a real world is something you have to be hyper aware of. On a more practical level, that onboarding, new experiences mean that you have to have new ways of guiding them through it, making sure they don't get lost, doubly crucially, as they can actually get lost. So in Fix Up the City, we had versions of people that came into the world and spoke directly to you, but also underpinning the entire experience, we had Beryl, a computer voice, voiced by Miriam Margoyles, everyone's well-known character, and an easily understood voice that guided you through it, advising you. Now, as people get more and more familiar, that'll be less and less needed. But for us, we found that playtesters, when placed into environment, and a big shout out to University of South Wales, USW, who did incredible work doing playtesting with all ages, going, what do you expect to do? And what do you feel anxious doing? And then where do you need voices to tell you to do it? And actually, a lot of their research has been released as white papers. It's a thing of interest. Go seek them out. You also need signposting. Now, signposting, to make sure, it goes back to that theatrical space question. They can be very literal. So in this instance, on the right-hand side, you've got Fix Up the City, in which you are looking, or you're being told to look in a certain direction. You're having what you're looking at highlighted, and then you're having content that knows to land near you. So you can signpost and then react. It can also be behavioral triggers. So there's some incredible VR experiences that use sound to direct your awareness and attention, because you've got spatial sound. Now, within a city, the ability to layer that spatial sound as you would any other object means that you can direct people's attention. I've not seen it done yet, but I know that there are spatial audio things that have been done in other ways, and it's just a matter of time before we're starting to see soundscapes layered intelligently into cities. It is one of the things that we are going to be using with the Assassin's Creed experience to really refine this signposting question of how do we know where people need to look. All of that, and all of its slightly overly technical nature, does lead us to the fact that it's a narrative space, first and foremost. That this combination of exploration, play, and authoring gives incredible space for telling any story. Now, play becomes story, story becomes play because you're able to move around, because you're able to do a thing inside a space. It doesn't have to be authored. It doesn't have to be defined by what I want it to be. It can be defined by the city itself, by the people in it. So one of the ideas that we explored with the client is to have an environment that change based upon how many people fight against it. So to present a repressive regime, to enable people to get into the mindset of what it's like to be in an environment that is unsafe and unfriendly. And the amount of protest graffiti, the amount of protest actions that you take part in within the city changes the nature of that city. So you're not building an authorial story, you're building a world in which you're allowing a story to play out. So you're setting a provocation, and then that evolving content becomes what is an emergent form of storytelling, an infinite number of possible actions that lead to a shared environment. Now you see some of that even as far back as Pokemon Go, because you start to have personal experiences, but recursive personal experiences that feed into others. I mean, arguably you get a city. I mean, what is a city but a thing in which people are doing their own thing and having a cumulative effect? To go back to a moment to the content that you're putting into it, you do come up with questions of integrity. Now, integrity not on a kind of moral level, though that's important, but it's functional viability and ability to integrate. So how do you have cutscenes and real world content sitting alongside each other? And we've done a bunch of work, particularly with the work on with Wallace and Gromit, on level of detail and models and suitability, because the one thing that you don't want is the jarring. We've spoken all this time about how do you make it feel as if it's really there. If you put two different types of content next to each other, it takes people out of the experience. So when you are building these emergent stories, the last thing you want is to then slam a cutscene and go, oh yeah, by the way, it doesn't look right anymore because you've seen something different. It was a real challenge and something that we were only really able to handle because we were working with Aardman, who are unmitigated geniuses in being able to balance those things.
So was that from user feedback, that the whole idea of just having a single character, which as you mentioned it, that does make sense because it's often the interaction between multiple characters, AR characters, which sort of gives it away. But yeah, I've never really thought about it before. But yeah, I think that's very good design advice on an AR system.
It's something that we learned the hard way. A lot of this project was underpinned by jumping into the unknown. Those moments with giant, horrifying Wallace, they're learning experiences, and it was the purpose of the project. The project was undertaken predominantly as a research project funded by UK government to say what does a future audience look like, and equip not just us but the entire industry with a knowledge and awareness to say how do audiences interact with each other, with space, with content, and what types of content move into these spaces. So at the moment, we're actually working with the UK publishing industry to say, how does book content live in cities where books are no longer confined to pages? How do you do that? And then how do you maintain that integrity? I'm actually just going to gloss over some of the detail of Fix Up the City because it's just essentially a bunch of numbers. What I will do here is just briefly say, okay, this is the core of what you were able to do in Fix Up the City. Just to really drive it home that you are in a city, you are scanning an environment only so that it knows where you are. And then the content then occupies that city space around you and enables giant robots to fight buildings, for you to see and walk around and to interact with characters based upon your proximity, and have that flexible environment that's split by chapter and by story. All of this goes to what we're doing next. We're going to be literally pushing the boat out with Assassin's Creed Valhalla's immersive experience. It takes Winchester. Now, Winchester features heavily in the game. It's the seat of King Alfred during the time. So if you've played, you'll know that you have a number of run-ins. You have to go there. We're going to be taking Winchester from the game, and we're going to be putting it into Winchester in the real. So we're going to be letting you move between current Winchester and past Winchester and look at the period just after the game's narrative ends. So after King Alfred, and I don't think this is a spoiler as it's over 1,000 years ago, wins the Battle of Edington and defeats the Vikings. What happens to the city then? What happens to the characters? How do you step into a world? How do you explore it? Now, we're not going to have people climbing buildings that aren't there, and we're not going to have them diving off things that they shouldn't dive off, but you are going to be able to interact with assets from the game. This is about the game world breaking its banks. I'm always reticent to use transmedia too heavily because it's got so many different understandings these days. But this is a really good moment, because things that you have seen in one form, which are themselves rooted in a real world, come back, breaking the banks of that game into our world, smoothing out those edges so it's no longer a hard edge between what's real and what's not. Taking the story further, but also layering in the factual story of the history. That's going to be launching later this year, and we're super excited about its potential. That potential is something that goes way, way, way beyond the things that I've been talking about here. I've not included any images here because this is not about what can be done now. This is about what will be done. This technology has the potential to make spaces that are accessible, that layers in risks and warnings for people with mobility needs, has the ability to guide and keep people safe, has the ability to enhance communication, to make spaces that are equitable. Now, we are scratching the surface of the enormous potential here. And as I've touched on a little bit, it lets you tell hidden stories, and hidden stories that with a more diverse set of voices than ever before. Something that is going to be crucial to shaping the way in which we see our world and our culture around us. So I think those two things, that equitability and a diverse voice within cities and within play, takes it beyond play, takes it into something that will actually help us define how we interact with spaces and each other. So that is that, just about landing on time.
Well, you've done a great job. Probably where do you see the shortcomings at the moment? So obviously you've talked about some great technology that's coming. So there's an amazing set of APIs that you can address or about to address. Is there still something that's nagging you at the moment? And we're going, oh, geez, I wish I could do X or Y or Z that, would just sort of top it all off, the sprinkling, the icing on the cake?
If I'm honest, not really. We're at a point where if you can imagine a thing, so long as you've got a bit of flexibility, you can kind of make it. The limits only become apparent when you're talking about things outside of your own systems. So when you're talking about internet connectivity. Mm-hmm. So you try and build an experience in a forest. You got no internet, so you're gonna have to preload everything. You got no, like, you go out into the wild and it doesn't really work. So this is why it's play inside cities and not play inside the countryside. That will change in time. But for the rest of it,
it's funny you say that. I built an experience in a forest once, a LiDAR. When LiDAR first came out, it was awful. It was like, let's build this thing, and the characters will come behind the trees, and we'll make a little film about it. Probably one of the worst projects I've ever done.
And it's frustrating because the core is there, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's just those kind of bigger, wider limitations.
Yeah.
I suppose the only other thing, and the thing that we're starting to really dabble with, is richer environmental awareness, so machine learning. So as soon as you're saying, okay, there are things that are living inside the city, well, those things can start to have not just programmed AI, but they can have machine learning AI. and they can get better and they can evolve around you. And then you're starting to talk about really fun metascapes inside cities.
Yeah, it's opened my eyes. Some of the stuff you're showing me today, I thought I was across AR quite well. Obviously not. I haven't actually thought about it probably from a couple of different angles like you have, and just even the weather stuff. It's you know, it's a given and an obvious thing, but why haven't we done that before in AR? Like, you know,
it's because you're not English. The English, as soon as they can get an umbrella
here
out,
that's right.
You don't have any weather. We've got weather all day, every day.
Yeah, that rain going sideways. You've got that. How do I translate that into angle of rain? Is it sideways or yeah? I suppose we don't have that.
Much fun.
Yeah. No, hey, Will, thank you very much for your time. It's been fantastic.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you for kicking off the festival. It's been a big week for myself and the rest of the team, and you've put my nerves at ease. I'm like, if the rest of the festival's like this, it'll be a great festival.
It's going to be amazing.
So, thank you very much, Will. You're a legend, and we'll talk soon. We're talking in about 3 days' time.
Yeah, going to be really cool to come back again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Cheers. See you.